One, thank you for joining today's session, Mobile Privacy Unveiled, Fortifying Your Mobile Frontiers. I am pleased and excited to be joined by a number of esteemed guests here, Clev, Rena, and Sandeep. We'll go around and introduce ourselves, and then we will continue with the discussion. And if you have any questions or thoughts, comments, please enter them into the Q&A, and we will answer those questions as we go along. So to start off with, Clev, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me on, Karen, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Clev Messador. I'm the Executive Director of Blockchain Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we focus exclusively on education and increasing access. So risk mitigation is a conversation that we lean into. My background is in policy. I served in the Obama administration. I worked in Congress for 2 members. And I actually first learned about Bitcoin in 2013 while serving in the Obama administration. I've been working in the space for over 6 years and really focus on inclusion and access and looking at risk and making sure risk is part of the conversation is a big part of the work that I do. So I'm excited for this conversation and want to commend Karen for early on, she has been focused on, how to make sure that, the Web3 space is safe and making sure that this conversation continues. So I'm glad to be here and excited to deepen the conversation.
Excellent. And Sandeep, would you like to
Hey,
introduce?
Karen. Thank you for having me here in this webinar and welcome everyone. This webinar is going to be very interesting from Clev's experience, Reena's experience, and the Karen's overall. So my name is Sandeep. I am CTO at SecureLayer7. So my background specifically coming from the offensive security, and we do test mobile apps and web apps to ensure they have a good security posture.
Excellent. And I'm Karen. Hi, everyone. I am the SVP of Mobile DevOps and Security Solutions at Appdome. I started years ago in the crypto space, met Clev around that time, and started a fraud detection company for identifying fraud on blockchain transactions, credit card, and bank transactions. And it was at that time met the chairman of Appdome, where we talked about the new project and sort of initiative to go into fraud prevention. And because crypto transactions, when they're defrauded, means the user loses all their money, we knew we needed to have a way of preventing fraud as opposed to just detecting it, because once you detect it, it's money's all gone. So we joined forces. The company I started became part of Appdome, and we've been fighting that fight ever since. And so I want to hand it over to Rena. Thank you, Rena, for joining us. Rena, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rena. I'm with Trust Machines. We are a Bitcoin product studio. We build products both on Bitcoin L1 and Bitcoin L2. All of our products are consumer facing. You can imagine products like a wallet, some DeFi protocols, a TLD for Web2 to Web3 domains, and fundamentally, our goal is to increase the Bitcoin economy and untap BTC as an asset to be used in consumer products. We think there's a lot of value in building open source decentralized products, and kind of our journey into the mobile frontier is that we are about to take some of our products to mobile. All of our products have historically been on browser extension or web, and kind of the risk calculus or how we kind of build for mobile is very different than what we do in browser, because blockchain is very different for how you operate in kind of either sides of the world. And then prior for being at Trust Machines, I used to be the COO of Binance US, one of the world's, America's largest crypto exchange.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining. Really appreciate your perspectives on crypto. We'll say that while we are talking a lot about in the forefront here, crypto and Web3 examples. Everything that we're discussing in terms of hacks, security, scams is applicable to all the other industries. And Sandeep will also touch on that, as well as I will touch on those other use cases as we go throughout this presentation. But really, thank you all for your perspectives. They're extremely valuable and really round out and create a much bigger, fuller picture of the problem we're trying to address. And so I'm just going to go forward and talk a bit about mobile privacy and hand it over to Clev and Rena for their perspectives. But just to start off at a high level, why mobile privacy matters. All of you know there's personal information that is in your mobile app and your mobile device. And that is important because it contains all of the contact details, biometric information, as well as all the credentials, that you'll need to get into your various accounts and wallets. Now, this mobile privacy is important because it builds user trust and confidence. And just like Rena was talking about, and a lot of companies who have mobile wallets, it's important that that privacy is protected because that's critical and foundational for trust between users and their service providers. And then finally, because this information is so valuable, it is a target for exploits, and cyber criminals, as well as other organizations, will seek to exploit this data for different and malicious purposes. And so to just give you a high-level overview of the recent attacks, there have been a number of attacks and continue to be attacks against private key and wallets themselves, and as well as phishing attacks on Discord, generative AI scams, and then a number of major attacks that you see here that range in the millions of dollars, from 2.5 million to hundreds of millions of dollars. And so in all of these cases, the challenge is being able to address these different hacks. So in the case of private key and wallet compromises, about 30% of the total losses in the Web3 space were due to private key and wallet compromises. So this is the biggest area. And this type of attack has been especially prevalent, highlighting the vulnerabilities in digital wallets. In terms of phishing attacks, there have been a number of phishing attacks, especially on the Discord platform. And in terms of generative AI, this is where the use of deep fake technology has been used to target both individuals and corporations. So you probably have seen this in the news, making it really challenging to distinguish between legitimate and fraudulent messages and communication. So how did these attacks happen? So on the left-hand side here, you'll see a diagram of the mobile attack chain. And really the compromised device is being targeted, is being used, is being exploited for various attacks. And that could be attacks, phishing attacks, malware could be added to the device. And that malware can be disguised as legitimate apps that are then used to steal your funds. And then once they're installed, they might record your screen or approve transactions or steal your private keys. In COVID, there were a lot of COVID tracking apps that were supposedly benign and useful, but in reality, they were being used, or they had backdoors that would effectively be tracking what you're doing and harvesting that information. And same thing with other productivity apps. Another source of this malware and spyware comes from apps that are downloaded from third-party stores. And so that would be not the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. And so this is, again, where attackers are using these third-party apps to add code that will do these malicious things. The second area around how these attacks happen is through phishing. So as many of you experience, the phishing can come through SMS or social media, and this is where the hackers will steal your login credentials or trick you into sending funds to their wallets. And then finally, there's a lot of exploitation of weaknesses in infrastructure. So in large organizations like SolarWinds, employees will log in using unprotected devices with unprotected apps into their local VPN, their company's VPN, and it is there through which attacks will go into the broader infrastructure. In Web3, many Web3 projects rely on traditional Web2 infrastructure. And so hackers are exploiting these vulnerabilities to gain access to user data. And again, as social media is a prime battleground for scams, these mobile users are very vulnerable. And so it is through the mobile device, the apps, that these other systems in the organization can be impacted. So I just want to pause here and turn over to Clev and see, Clev, what are your thoughts on some of the attacks that we just described from an end user perspective, but also given your unique role on in Washington, D.C. and with the Blockchain Foundation, what are you hearing from policymakers about mobile privacy and their concerns, first with crypto and Web3, and then more broadly?
Yeah, and thank you for laying it out so well in terms of the challenges we face. And when we look at consumers and for policymakers, that's their only focus, right? Market participants, how are they interacting with digital products, particularly digital assets like cryptocurrencies, but also what are the safeguards? I do want to say that the solve that we don't talk enough about is education, education, education. But also for policymakers, there's a sense that especially the crypto industry are that risk is a blind spot. And within the crypto natives industry, there is we don't talk enough about this, right? We avoid talking about fraud, but as a result, for policymakers, it looks like it's a blind spot for us, and especially when companies are, hacked or compromised over and over, it looks like that's not what the industry is doing, and clearly that is not the case, as evidenced here and as evidenced by the work at Appdome. But I will say that people don't think of financial literacy as a key component, but there was a recent hearing on Capitol Hill about combating ransomware, and Congresswoman Yoon Kim, who is actually co-chair of the Financial Literacy and Wealth Creation Caucus, she pointed out that we can put in all the infrastructure we can, but if we're not providing financial literacy for everyday people, for people in the workforce, that person is still going to click on a link or say, oh my God, I can get rich, do this. So the education piece has to go hand in hand in terms of putting in the infrastructure. So sorry, I live near a fire station and a police station. So education and infrastructure have to go hand in hand. But I also want to say that, we need to make sure that we're not going too far with, oh, here's the solution, when the majority of market participants are engaging with digital assets, but don't necessarily know about how to secure their private key. They don't know about, how to, focus on wallet safety, right? So they're just, being driven by FOMO, or they actually hold it within PayPal or Cash App. So as an industry, we have a lot more to do, especially as we get more commercialization and new retail investors are participating. That education in terms of just the basics of what a wallet is very important, because we can put in the infrastructure, we can find all of these great softwares, but if people don't know they exist or don't even know that they can access them, that's going to be a challenge. I want to close by, pointing out a project that Consumer Reports have. It's a digital marketplace led by Delicia Hand, who used to work for the CFPB. And so what they're doing is they're, leveraging the knowledge that they have from evaluating appliances and all of this other electronics, and they're applying it to fintechs as well as, crypto, and really looking at how do they evaluate, which is the safety, levels of various wallets or various digital products. And I think as we are as an industry moving forward, we're not going to catch up on mitigating risk if we don't talk about it more, if we don't lean into the recognition that it happens, but also if we're not promoting more the safeguards that we're putting in place. Because if everyday participants, and I'm talking about your auntie, and if they're buying cryptocurrencies and they have no idea how to safeguard, their assets, then we're still going to be in this really difficult regulatory position where we're currently in. I'll stop there.
No, thank you very much, Clev, and please jump in throughout this conversation. We love your perspective and value it. And so I want to hand it over to Rena. And Rena, could you talk a bit about trust machines, your experiences in general in the industry, and also about Leather, your wallet, and your experiences there? Would love to understand from your perspective as someone who at an organization that makes or creates wallets, what that unique experience is.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be chatting with you all. For us, it's a very different dynamic of being a non-custodial provider. So we create software solutions for everybody to use every day, but it is a steep learning curve for users because they are kind of their own security aspect to their assets, their wallet, their keys, whatever apps they did, apps they interact with. And I would say, kind of doubling down to what Clem had reiterated earlier, the majority of our efforts go to user education, user security, kind of giving them the right tools in place to create their own modular stack for what security means to them. For example, we are one of the largest Bitcoin non-custodial wallet providers. We are a Web3 wallet that hits your browser extension that allows you to safely store Bitcoin or other Bitcoin-related assets like NFTs, and then connect to Bitcoin DeFi or whatever you want to do with your Bitcoin. With that, there is a lot of education and a lot of usability that we are creating so that users can securely safeguard their private keys. Because as the technology service provider, I do not have access to these wallets. I don't even know what their keys are. Hell, I don't even know what these wallet addresses are because we're just the layer of being able to create it, which is kind of the beauty of Bitcoin in particular, your keys, your custody, your assets. But from a user experience, especially for someone, let's say like my mom, this is an entirely foreign concept when you're used to, I put my money in a bank, Chase or Wells Fargo, whomever safeguards my asset. This is a very flipped scenario. And some of the approaches that we take for kind of our wallet customers who are creating their first wallet is really kind of on demand, kind of bespoke user guides that kind of port of, we're glad you created your wallet. Here is how you should safeguard your keys. Please do not copy and paste and put into a 1Password or Fastlane or whatever it may be. Please do not do a screenshot. Please do not just put this on your desktop where your computer can get stolen. And we go a little bit of the extra mile of what actually means to safeguard your assets. How do you kind of authenticate your keys in a way that you're protecting the generational wealth that you're creating? Because we understand Bitcoin for a lot of people might be generational wealth creation. And the way we kind of think about kind of proactive user education and communications is very much of, these are what phishing scams look like. These are what trusted dApps look like. Any dApp that connects to our wallet that we have made a partnership, our team has taken the time to vet the team. We've taken the time to get to know the founders, use the protocol. Hell, we've even put our own capital into the protocol and kind of gone through the security protocols before we would even allow it to touch products that we are creating. I think that kind of resilience layer is missing in a lot of Web3 projects because we err on the side of wanting to be open source, decentralized, everybody can use it, but some of that kind of responsibility, wanting to be a little bit more vigilant, kind of what Clev was getting at, kind of the are we doing right still as the technology service provider at the end of the day to our customers? And I think this is kind of an area where a lot of the work that happens on the Hill from Clev and other leaders in the industry of trying to educate to our regulators that we're not a free-for-all industry. We're not even trying to be a free-for-all industry. We want to be supportive of safety measures put in place, because at the end of the day, we want to see this flourish.
Yes, and totally agree. There is, as an end user of wallets and many different types of wallets, I totally appreciate the educational efforts that all of you have done. And in particular, I was talking to friends, associates of mine who saw a recent hack with 68 million that was lost, and it was through what they call it crypto poisoning. So basically the user here, who probably was a very experienced user, did something which was very common. They only looked at the first 4 digits and the last 4 digits and made the mistake, right, of thinking his wallet was a wallet that was his, but in fact it was the hacker's, because the hacker had been basically spamming him or something, communicating with him with a different wallet, the hacker's wallet. And so trust is very, education is very important, and being able to understand where and what type of attacks come about is incredibly important, because like we're talking about, it can result in massive losses. In other industries, there are a lot of fines associated with the loss of data. So app data leakage can result in regulatory fines, legal fees, all the things that the government and other policyholders are trying to make sure that companies protect as much as they can their data and their end users' data. And then,
if I
go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add, I wanted to, really commend Rena and the work that they're doing at Trust Machines to go so far to make sure that, the market participant is aware. People may not know that members of Congress often call these exchanges to their office because they're hearing from their constituents. Well, we heard from 100 constituents that they lost everything in their wallet, and oftentimes these exchanges or these digital assets providers are explaining to the members of Congress that we make it very hard for people to withdraw their assets. We give them so many options to say, you need to do this thing before you withdraw, you need to do that thing, all of these steps to make sure that it is them, to make sure that they're thinking it thoroughly. And, usually, the industry person is saying, we did our part. And the member of Congress is like, well, it doesn't help my constituents. But putting in those layers, as I said before, without the education along the way, it doesn't matter. The person is just, sadly, the victim of a phishing scheme and is just trying to get their money out so they could give it to someone. And even though they don't realize that these layers of difficulty are for their protection. So, what Rena outlined in terms of telling people, there was a recent New Yorker reporter who did a story where she admitted that she was defrauded. And she is smart, she writes about finance, but she fell for a phishing scheme. So we have to realize that this is not about, oh my God, this unintelligent person. We're all susceptible. And for the industry, those creating these, products and software, that we have to build in these layers of education along the way, because that's the only way we're going to really get the regulatory confidence and trust that we're looking for.
Exactly. It has to be this hand-in-hand relationship between the end user and the companies that are making the wallets, the apps, the exchanges. We've got to work together, and that starts with education, starts with an understanding of what the scams are, what the attacks are about, and then what you can do, whether it's yourself personally or the apps, and what the app makers can do, and the developers can do who are making these services and products for companies. And so I just want to pause here for a second. I know we talked a lot about crypto and Web3, but wanted to turn over to Sandeep and share a little bit about his experience in other industries and how mobile privacy is critical to the success of those other industries.
Hey, thanks, Karen. I think you've been set the stage here, and I would like to specifically talk about the healthcare industry that I'm closely working with them. I know we are moving from a little bit a blockchain away for a few minutes, and then we'll come back to that. So in this case, healthcare is nowadays trying to become a fully digital companies, and they want to operate digital technology companies because users wants to have everything on their tip of the hands from a mobile device, right? They want to have access all of their medical reports, their medical information, specifically the confidential insurance details and all that, right? So everything is available on your mobile apps, and app makers are making a lot of innovation. So you must be heard of the pacemakers are getting connected to your mobile apps. Can you just think of how big attack surface is going to be increased because of that? We are using devices such as wearable devices, which gives a lot of information about your body. That information is available with the company, and we don't really know how that is being handled. Many of the folks they talk about security, but the real execution is not really there. But when we work with a lot of healthcare companies, what we figured out, they really like to deploy a lot of different technology, but when we talk about the privacy from your mobile application or the web application, it's really concerning for me if I look through the security testing lenses, right? And that required always different types of changes, always different information needs to be updated on that application, and it always gets changed. And that's becoming a biggest challenge to a lot of healthcare providers to maintain that data. There was a couple of news came in last month itself, where the data has been breached. But if you try to deep dive, it's not that a 0-day exploit has been used to get inside. It's a all basics that we are talking about blockchain. It starts with the phishing, social engineering, and all of these things still exist and still applicable, similar to blockchain, which is also on the healthcare as overall, right? And attackers are very easily identify such vulnerabilities, and that actually impacting the human life. And in fact, the hospitals are actually going down, and the services are not really available for the patients. And the moment we are relying on these digital devices and the digital apps, the staff working at the hospital, they don't really know how to transition. If something goes down, then how we should transition to the paperwork again. And you can just think about someone is in the hospital admitted, and they want to change the IV, but they don't have information. What was the previous IV? What was the previous medication that they have written? It's not really accessible. You just think about that, right? In that case, there are a lot of different impacts coming through directly to the human when we talk about the healthcare aspects. And there are more different attack surfaces are getting created every time, because those are the devices are now directly connected to the internet, and it's easily accessible through with the basic recon process, which will probably give you the at least information which can be used further to exploit it, right? And that's how the healthcare security should taken care with a lot of different the security best practices, and also the routine test. Probably we will be able to figure out more different vulnerabilities. And that's how I want to close here, Karen.
Yes, and so thank you for that. So just like we talked about blockchain and more payment, you could say related scenarios, and privacy breaches. Healthcare is a big area where privacy has an immense impact because it's actually loss of life or degradation
Yes.
of life that we're talking about. So thank you very much for sharing that use
And
case and Mhm.
no, I would love to weigh in because I do think that when you look at enterprise blockchain, healthcare is where we've seen the most traction in terms of utility. And when you even think of the potential of blockchain being used to store patient data securely, as was mentioned, we go from doctor to doctor and we're often asked, bring your x-rays, and we can't find them, and somebody's trying to fax them, and being able to use that. So leveraging technology to make that more seamless, especially as the medical space is becoming more and more digital. But it also raises the whole conversation about digital identity, which is so important because that privacy piece and the identity piece go hand in hand, especially for vulnerable communities who are more and more going into a full digital world, that are used to operating in the physical space where they can actually go to a person to see if this is okay. So there's so much for us to do to safeguard. But digital identity, we have to think about that in terms of the privacy piece as well.
Yes. And so getting to sort of to shifting to the conversation to, okay, what are best practices? What are things that we can do? It is at the core protecting this data, whether it's data on the app, data in the mobile app, digital identity. Those are all things that have to be protected. And it's something that Clev and Rena, you both touched on before, which is how do we create this layer
Yeah.
around the person, the user, the app, so that that information is safeguarded. And a big part of that is education. There are certainly things that in terms of technology can be done, and whether it's those layers of getting the money out that make it more challenging for hackers to get the money out,
Yeah.
or it's things like obfuscating the application's code, making it difficult for hackers to understand how the app works or identify vulnerabilities. For example, blocking phishing. So this is something we've seen a lot with AI technology advancing. There are a lot of new exploits where attackers will call a user while they're using their app, and that's where the highest amount of illegal transfer of funds occurs. And then there's also just, encrypting the sensitive data, whether it's in healthcare or in crypto and Web3 or any kind of banking scenario that is used in phishing scams. We've got to stop, the malware to gather this attack, and we've got to stop any kind of unnecessary or insecure communication. So if the attacker is trying to impersonate, or the attacker is trying to use an insecure, trying to use a connection they shouldn't be, we need to catch that. And so in the best practices around development and in the app making world, there's been this movement called Shift Left, which is how do we enable developers to early on build security in, just like we were talking earlier about how do we help end users early on understand the risks and the attacks that could happen and mitigate those risks. So the same sort of thinking of, hey, we've got to start early and understand what's going on so that, like we talked about, users and tech companies can work hand in hand. And so this process of identifying, knowing what the issues are so that you can actively defend against them is very important on the one hand. And on the other hand, testing, continuously identifying any new attacks that could be happening, and mitigating those in the future is as well important. So it's a continuous process. And so some of the specific things that we have seen in terms of attacks on mobile privacy include overlay attacks. So we have seen a lot of hackers in crypto, Web3 and other industries as well put screens on top of login screens, legitimate login screens. And so the user doesn't know that when they enter in their credentials, they're actually putting it into this overlay screen that the hacker is collecting data from. Key logging is also another thing that happens quite often, where hackers are tracking keystrokes of the user, and by doing that, capturing sensitive information. We talked earlier about copy paste. This is a very common attack. I
Yeah.
think you brought that up, where there are a lot of, a lot of people who just copy paste their private keys or whatever, uh, their pass keys into a clipboard because there's just a lot of data there. And that's the first place where hackers go. The other thing that I heard early on when I was working in crypto was the use of screen sharing or screen mirroring. So folks, attackers would basically use tools to get into an app, and they often were, it was a social engineering attack. So they were given permission. At sometimes, other times they just took permission and they were able to get control of the app through screen sharing. And then there are other tools like anti-root or Magisk, and I think Sandeep, you'll talk about some of
Yes.
these, which are specific tools that hackers use to basically get around permissions, and get around, the access to the app. So going to what you're saying, Clev, this digital identity is easily compromised because these tools are being used. And then the last thing is around memory protection, and the fact that a lot of attackers are going straight to the memory to see what they can find and pull that out. And so making sure that this memory is protected is really critical. And so I want to hand it over here. So I just talked about some of the things that the hackers are doing, the methods and the attacks they're using to not only get into the app and do something harmful right away, or get into the app and gather information so that they can do phishing and other bad things later on. Both are really bad. It's basically, just a lot of tools that hackers are using, methods, approaches that they're using. And so hand it over to Sandeep to talk a bit more about how you, in your area and line of work, identify these issues and vulnerabilities in apps.
Yeah. Thanks, Karen. And those are the issues, are very important for any mobile apps. All right. So, we were really talking about this social engineering attack, educating users, helping them to ensuring they understand the security. That's a really important part of, I would say, a people understanding. But there is another angle, that's a technology vulnerabilities. To identify those technology related vulnerabilities within the app, it has to go through with the process of pen testing. And that happens, the moment that happens, we will be able to identify vulnerabilities before that has been discovered by the attackers. And that will allow us to, fix those risks before it's too late. And which are also reducing, significantly the risk of exposing those application or mobile apps to the internet, right? So while performing, the pen testing, we actually go through with the different steps and procedure, but I'll keep it a little short here so that our audience from blockchain and the healthcare can understand what is actually the role of the pen test here. So the moment we look at the different applications, right? So it goes with the wide range of different attack vectors. If it is a blockchain, then definitely we will have to understand how you're accepting the addresses, how you're calculating how much amount has to be sent, what could be the part of app is going to be a crown jewels of the application, so that we specifically can focus on that. And that could be from a static app, and that can be also from the mobile apps API. So we need to understand the overall attack surface here. So usually the attack surface that we look at whenever we see at any application is the code of your mobile apps, which usually app maker use to build that. And parallelly, to communicate back to the server, there are a lot of different APIs. So we always look through these lenses, and then we figure out, okay, what could be the possible vulnerabilities in the app. So like Karen mentioned previously, those are the vulnerabilities usually you will see from the static app. And there are different vulnerabilities that you will be able to figure out in the mobile API apps. So, and I think the major part for any app is going to be like, is your authentication part, and specifically for the blockchain as well, because it's directly deriving to the cost, which is the hard-earned money through which user usually put there back in mobile apps. Uh, but if I want to like, divide into the major objective, as I just mentioned, that's a discovery of vulnerabilities. And then we actually have to get into the risk assessment. And the moment we identify the risk is very much critical. And then it is really helping us to like, address it as quickly as possible. And as we know, mobile apps, specifically from the blockchain and the healthcares, are heavily regulated from the different types of compliances, like SOC 2 Type 2, PCI DSS, if you're accepting the payments, GDPR in the Europe, HIPAA, and California law, which specifically like, looks for all of these different problems altogether. So as a high level, discovering vulnerability that I explained, and then risk assessment and the compliance requirement, which is routinely required. Usually like, to understand what could be the standard or framework that we follow, so that, we should be able to say, okay, the security posture of this mobile apps looks pretty good. How do we define that? From a standard perspective, what we recommend to go with the NIST OAuth, which is including top 10 and the ASVS. And there are some specific compliance, or I would say the standard which we use while performing the pen test. But this is not really sufficient, because we will also have to prepare a lot of different methodology by looking at the application, by understanding your app that is being used. So let's say you have two different technology. One would be for Android, another one would be for your iOS. In that case, we will have to change methodology and understand what is the business logic that has been used and what was the purpose of this app. Based on that, like, we usually like, deploy the standard and our own methodology, which help us to figure out what we will do so that we can identify risk, and so that this will be improving your security posture as overall. And that's how it will help and identify and address high risk, critical risk vulnerabilities, which may cause like, financial losses, data breaches, the many other things which is revolving around the risk of these mobile apps.
Yeah, and to add to that, there are also federal standards. And so I know, Cleb, you've been working with a lot of policymakers on some aspects of that. Everything that Sandeep was just talking about here is mirrored, or there are elements of it in the FFIEC standards around mobile apps for financial institutions. And that is now covering crypto and other related Web3 related businesses. And so these kinds of standards are really important, because it is collectively taking the wisdom of a number of groups and organizations as they've dealt with these issues. But the good thing is also these standards are changing. They're evolving as the client base changes, as technology changes, as we all, evolve.
Yes.
And so sorry, just want to hand it back to you, Sandeep.
Yeah, thanks. So I just talked about like, what are the components that's really helping, which is including methodology and the standards. But if we get into nuts and bolts of this pen test, like I just want to connect the dots. We actually had an opportunity, and we had some of the mobile apps from the Appdome, which is fully protected on various different aspects of the security that we were talking previously. And we were like, moving through this methodology that you're able to see on the screen. So we start with the information gathering. If you receive like, the Android file or the iOS file, we usually like, have to understand overall mobile application using our information gathering process. That's right from your architecture of the application, functionality of your application, what kind of environment it usually operates. Sometimes it not really operating on various different settings, like, if the device is jailbroken, it should or it should not operate. These kind of things that we try to understand. And then we actually set the complete foundation of the test so that we are able to understand what could be the goal of the overall pen test. The next stage that we usually ask for, like, for a lot of different blockchain and the healthcare companies that we should prepare the threat modeling, because that gives a lot of information about your app. And we also understand what could be the crown jewel, and where the pen tester should put a lot of attention to the application. In blockchain, maybe a transfer of the funds is very important feature that we should take a look on that. In healthcare, the safeguarding the PII information is very, very important. So this threat modeling really helps to set the expectation and figure out what could be the crown jewels as overall. And then then later on we move on to the static analysis, which we also call as a reverse engineering of the mobile apps. That's including your iOS and the Android. There we follow our standards, like look at the coding errors, look at the insecure coding practices, figure out what could be the stored in the app, which is potentially leaking sort of data. Just an example, API keys, right? And those kind of things we immediately report to the customer if that's really creating a noise and leaking some sensitive information. And then we move to the dynamic analysis of the app. So that dynamic analysis involves behavior of your mobile application, interactions. There are a lot of activities happens within the mobile apps. And then we've tried to trigger some potential vulnerabilities during this dynamic analysis, which is including your mobile apps API, right? Further, we move on to the network traffic analysis. What kind of data that you're transferring from your mobile app to your servers, right? Is it like a secure communication? Is it with the proper authentication and authorization? Are there any problem broken access control, or are there any issue which is actually leaking information without any authentication? Those kind of things we usually look into this network traffic analysis and the API. Previously, Karen was specifically talking about the encryption and the cryptography review. This plays a major role here, because if the moment you're storing sensitive data in your mobile apps or the device, maybe in the SQLite database or whatever the means of technology that you're using to store, and if that's a sensitive information, storing with no cryptography or encryption, then that may lead to different types of leaks. So we also ensure we are looking through with the different data, which probably is sensitive data, and which can be easily accessible from the pen testers that we report. Moving on to the very important section of this overall methodology is authentication and authorization. We are seeing a lot of different authentication authorization, and every company has a different authentication and authorization. Few people use OpenAM, few people use SSOs. There are so many other different way of application authentication nowadays we can able to see. And the moment we look at those authentication, the primary thing that we figure out, okay, how we are deploying that authentication. And the moment you deploy, have you gone through with the best practices? Have you gone through with the important security configurations? And many a time what we figured out, because of the misconfiguration, we are able to bypass the overall authentication process in your OAuth 2.0 or even in OpenAM or whatever the means of technology that you're using for authentication, right? And that's how we report to our customers to figure out how we can prevent as overall unauthorized access in the mobile apps authentication.
Yeah. So the interest
Yeah.
I was going to just switch gears because I know you have a few other things here,
Yeah.
code tampering, secure data storage. I'll just touch on those in
Yeah.
our demonstration, and then we can come back to this. And so, like Sandeep was saying, with all of those recommendations that he just made, you can take the recommendations, but also the vulnerabilities he's identified, and programmatically, in an automated way, secure for each and every one of those areas. So for example, he talked about, and this is just oriented to the screen, this is the Appdome platform on the left-hand side, our mobile apps that you would load, whether for Android or iOS. And then you would select an app, for example, and everything I'm doing here can be done through an API call. But basically you would select in-app. And then, like we talked about in terms of data encryption and specifically private keys, ensuring that these private keys are protected, you can click on or call the data at rest encryption API and then just select in-app preferences, in-app strings, so you can protect those private keys, but also the APIs that Sandeep talked about, so that any APIs that are in the code are secured and cannot be accessed. I heard, Rena, you talk about how you don't have any of the information around the addresses even that customers are using, which is awesome. But unfortunately, there are a lot of organizations who do. And I was unfortunately the end user of a hack recently where the organization kept the addresses as well as the private keys, and that information was compromised, and it was, you know, through the mobile app. So that information is critical for developers, even though they're fast and furious trying to get out new features. It's important to protect, and so encryption is critical. Like Sandeep was talking about, ensuring the communication between the app and any server is also of paramount importance. And this is where blocking any kind of non-SSL connections, malicious proxies that are being used, and so forth, should be a part of any solution that an app maker has. And then once you have selected these features, whether they're security features or fraud features to protect against social engineering and potentially later on these phishing attacks, you know, like we talked about identity, like Clev, you spoke about protecting the digital identity, which means protecting against somebody who's trying to bypass Face ID, say on a phone. It's important to have all these protections in place and then click a button, call an API, and have those protections automatically added, because a lot of times the developers just don't have time to waste. They don't have time to develop these security features, keep up with the attacks that all these hackers are doing, because especially as AI generates these malware and other attacks faster than before and in more sophisticated ways than before, it's extremely hard for developers to keep up with all the changes that are necessary. So there are tools out there that, like Appdome, allow you to automate this process so that within minutes, you have a solution that is designed specifically to your app. So Appdome's AI technology looks at the selections or the security features that are needed, looks at the unique characteristics of the app, and then adds plugins so that there's this layer of protection, just like we were talking about, this layer of protection, this layer of understanding the user has. The developers now have a tool to add this layer of protection physically or actually, you know, in the code to the app, so that the app is protected, just like the user is aware and can protect themselves. And so in a few minutes, basically, the solution is adding all the things that Sandeep talked about that are critical in terms of securing the data storage, in terms of preventing tampering, preventing the hackers from doing reverse engineering, preventing hackers from getting in and changing anything in the app that shouldn't be changed, so that funds go to them, the hacker, instead of the end user. And so this whole process, I think, is really important. It kind of rounds out our discussion around how, you know, as a community, as an industry, we need to have the user education understanding, also the developer education understanding and tools, so that we can put these controls in place in the app and therefore help, you know, everyone protect themselves, whether it's the end users or the companies that are in this space. And so just to wrap up, as we're sort of switching, oops, as we are getting back to the end of the hour here, I just want to wrap up and say we talked about a number of things in this case study. We'll actually, because we didn't get to this part of the specific discussion, we'll send you a white paper that SecureLayer7 did authored on how we took the mobile privacy features that we talked about, and this is for Appdome, you know, just a few of the over 300 different features that we have. But for these mobile privacy features specifically, we put them into an app, and then SecureLayer7 went back and tested that protected app and showed that these issues were not, that these issues were in the app, so they're basically protected, meaning, and in his discussion here, you'll see that SecureLayer7, the penetration testing could not bypass these protections. And so these protections successfully provided that layer of protection. So we'll send this to you as a leave behind, or as a follow-up item to look into. And so as we're ending at the end of the hour here, we talked about a number of things and want to be able to continue this discussion with you. So for SecureLayer7 and Appdome, we would love to talk to you about how we can find any issues that you might have in your apps, fix them. I know Rena and Clev, I'll let you share how others may reach you and continue the discussion with you, but we want to keep this discussion going around making sure that the community in general, whether it's end users are educated, developers are educated, we are coming together, and solving this problem collectively together. And so I will send out this deck and any other contact information. Any parting words from anyone else?
I think my parting words is that a lot of this is like very exciting technology that we're all building and kind of running towards to a more, let's say, on-chain, mobile-friendly world. And it really just requires a little bit more extra vigilance in the world that we're entering in.
And I'll add that, I think it's great, Appdome is providing this service for developers, because they are, that on that front line with the end user, and we need more early warning systems that being developed, but we also need these tools to make sure that we can safeguard some apps that people use all the time. And the last thing I would say is that, as developers are building, traditionally education or financial literacy hasn't been, part of coding for a new product or service. And I think we have to get to the point where education is part of the product development process, because we are at a point where we are becoming so digital, and that there are so many new consumers who are non-technical participating, and that if this is baked in the development system, we'll have better products that are ensuring that the marketplace is safe, but also that could have greater utility for, end users.
Oh, great. Well,
Great.
thank you all. Oh, sorry, Sandeep.
No, I was saying thank you, Clive, for that information.
And thank you all for joining. Thank you, Cleb. Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Rena. Really appreciate your time, your honesty and transparency, and your input to this very valuable discussion. So thank you all, and I hope to continue this in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.